Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. With me, my good friend and special guest, Jack McCann with McCann & Hubbard over in Franklin, Tennessee. Been working with Jack and his firm now for, I want to say it's 8 to 10 years or something, right? 7, 8 at least. And well, before Keith, of course, before he left, so there was a few years there. Jack does great work. And one of the things, too, that's kind of a bonus is that about real estate. You have its own title company, so assisting in closing of properties, and you do a lot with regard to real estate, just not, you know, people selling, but contracts and helping people in different ways, right?
That's true, yeah. We do, I mean, anything that has to do with real estate. We do landlord-tenant law, we do contracts. You know, there's a lot of people that like to do real estate on their own, and we do purchase contracts, lease contracts, and you know, we deal with complaints sometimes. If you got an issue, we can help resolve issues with contractors sometimes. But if it's got something to do with real estate, we do that, and it ties perfectly in with estate planning, because most people, their biggest asset is their house. And if they're a business owner, sometimes their biggest investment is the real estate that they run their business out of. So it's worked out to be a very good overlap or niche.
This is one of the areas, too, when it comes to retirement, a lot of times people are doing, you know, there's transitions in retirement. So for some, that house they're living in is the house they're going to, you know, be in for the rest of their lives. For others, the kids have all moved to different parts, and maybe you want to, you know, move closer to your kids. I've had a number of clients do that to be, you know, be your kids and grandkids. Another is when, you know, maybe want to move to Florida. I've had, gosh, probably about 7 or 8 clients just in the last year, year and a half, move to Florida, retire, and get a place down there. Some have places in both, you know, Tennessee property and Florida property. This is where estate planning can be another big deal when it comes to avoiding probate in 2 states. So there's some things that get into it. So when it comes to real estate and retirement and the planning piece that goes into that and making sure that it's done correctly. So, you know, when you're looking at wills and trusts, or and we talked about what happens if you don't have a will or a trust, the basically intestate law, where the state has a plan for you. They're going to dictate how things get done. Another area where people are looking and say, well, I want to avoid probate, and they're trying to figure out all these little ways around it, right? Well, maybe if I did co-ownership, okay, I can put my kids on my bank accounts, or I can put my kids on my real estate. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Jack. So if you know, this is one of those areas when we're trying to, and this is why estate planning is so critical, because with estate planning, we're looking, in financial planning in general, by the way, it's about looking into the future. So we can see what happens. So you say, well, I'll just put my kids on. Well, here's some different things that could happen if you do that. And so what are some of the pros and cons, if you will, about putting your kids on real estate, on your home, or, well, we'll stick with that for starters.
Well, I mean, you're making a gift if you're putting your child on your house, just like you are. I mean, it's a little bit different with a bank account. When you put a child on a bank account, a lot of people sort of assume that you're doing that as a power of attorney, and you can actually do that. You can go to the bank and say, I don't want them to be a co-owner, I just want them to be in a power of attorney on my account. If they're a co-owner, then technically they get that asset when you pass away. The problem with the house is you're not talking about a few $1,000s, you're talking about an asset that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so technically, when you put them on title to that house, you're making a gift to them. And that can backfire. I mean, maybe it's your only child, maybe you don't mind making a gift, but the problem is when you pass away and that child gets the rest of that house, they've got your basis that you had, especially if you give them the whole house, they've got at least part of your basis, and that causes problems when they turn around and try and sell that. I've got a situation right now where it was an only child, dad had passed away, mom gave the house to her daughter, and now the daughter, I mean, the mom has passed away, now the daughter wants to sell the house. The problem is the house was bought in 1950, the basis is this big, and the value of the house is this big, and that daughter's going to have to pay tax on all this part in the middle. So it was a major, I mean, they were trying to do something that they felt was loving and kind and helpful, but it's really backfired. It's going to cause, I mean, literally, like about between $35,000 and $50,000 worth of taxes. It's crazy. And what they could have done is spend $1,000 or less on wills and a trust, and it would have accomplished the same thing as far as getting that house to the child. Would have avoided probate if we did a trust. But you're talking about $1,000 versus $40,000.
Yeah, and this is the difference. Because what happens then, if you have real estate, and the same principle, by the way, applies to stocks or mutual funds. is that whatever you pay for it, so you bought a stock or you bought a home, as Jack was saying, maybe you paid $100,000 for it, now it's worth $300,000, an example, or you paid, $500 and it's worth $1 million. All that gain, okay, if you're, for a couple, if you sell a house during your lifetime, you're going to get an exemption of $250,000 for a single person, $500,000 for a couple of gain that you don't have to pay tax on. Okay?
For your residence.
So that's for your home.
Yep.
That's all right, for your home. Rental properties or anything else, that's a whole nother matter. Now, when it comes to, however, when you're leaving so in this situation now, you've left that to your kids. If you do it through a will or a trust, they get a step up in basis, meaning whatever the property is worth when they get it, when they receive it, when they inherit it, that's what their cost is considered. So if they sold it right away, then there's no gain. So they're going to have no tax. All right? If they held on to it, there's only going to be the gain over the time that they have it. This is as opposed to having that 200, 400, 500, whatever amount of gain that they're going to have to pay tax on. Capital gains tax in the low, and depending on the amount of gain, it could push them up a bracket, all right, or a number of brackets. So it's definitely going to cause probably a 15% tax and potentially a 20% tax and potentially an excise tax that could bump it up closer to 24% on the high side. So this is, think about that. As Jack was saying, in that situation, you're talking about $35,000, $40,000 in taxes that this person's going to have to pay that could have been completely avoided by just spending $1,000 and getting a good estate plan done. All right. The other piece that comes in when it comes to planning like this is thinking in terms of making sure that you've got, and this goes back to the trust piece. Depending on the size of the estate, all right, the asset protection features can apply to real estate, it can apply to retirement accounts. There's so many factors that can come in there, and you can create, there's a number of ways of setting up your planning. One of the things when you come in is we're going to look at the differences between a will, a trust, and of course obviously we don't want to have the no plan, all right, we don't want the state's plan coming into play. So how can these things work to your advantage and how can you use them to your advantage? We'll show you what the rules are so you can make the right decision for you and for your family, okay? One of the things with wills and trusts is we talk about all the time, of course, it's one of the more common ones, and in my book, 7 Steps to Financial Freedom and Retirement on estate planning, the difference between wills and trusts, that of probate with a will and not having it with a trust. If you've got, we talked about real estate in Florida as an example, that now you could have probate in 2 states and the expense of that. All of this can be avoided with good planning and factoring in what's going to happen. So when you come in and we're talking about real estate as an example, we're going to say, well, what are your goals? What are your plans? Are you going to stay in a house? Is it something you think that you may want to sell at some point? And we factor that into your overall long-term planning. One of the things that, this is one as well. So thinking in terms of the real estate, I'm looking at Jack's list as well so we can hit on a few topics for you with regard to this. Think of real estate. If you're thinking, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to downsize it, I'm going to be able to capture equity here, I'm going to, maybe I'm going to sell the big house and buy 2 smaller homes, whatever it might be, okay, looking at that realistically, crunching the numbers for you, but also the factors that are going to be involved in that. And sometimes when it comes to real estate in particular, Jack, this is where people are thinking of it as like any other asset, but real estate's not very liquid. I mean, you can't just, the market may be down and I can't get what I had hoped to get for my house. I had not so many years ago, when we think back in 08 and 09, people that bought homes back in 06, 07, and potentially 08, when the market started dropping the way it did, a lot of people got stuck because their homes were not worth what they paid for them. And I had a number of clients wanting to relocate and couldn't sell the house. Couldn't get the money out to go buy another house. So we had to get pretty creative in ways to make that work. And there are ways to do it. In some instances, maybe you hold the property as a rental property, you take care of getting your new place and doing your relocation, you keep that until the values come back up. But there again, now what have I done? I've created a situation where it may take years, all right, 4 or 5 more years for that to recover. I've seen some real estate took 10 years to recover from the down market that we had after 07, back in 08 and 09, what happened there. So these are all factors when it comes to real estate. Yeah. And when you've got people calling in, are coming into your office and they're talking about, well, and here's another that I know you're not a fan of. So I just talked about how you can use your real estate, like as holding it as a rental property maybe to buy time. But another people look at are reverse mortgages.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of reverse mortgages, but I want to go back to something. You know, two things. One is, you're talking about the downturn in 2008 in the real estate, and I'm a big fan of real estate. I think it's a great investment from the standpoint of, you know, real estate generally stays solid. It isn't as fluctuate as much as the stock market, but there are times when the house is worth less than what you thought it would be worth, and you really can't sell it. But you can still turn it into rental property. It can still be an asset that generates income, and the good thing about that is, you know, whatever the going rental rate is, that's an income that you can, a stream that you can have. But if you're going to do that, you need to talk to an attorney and a financial advisor, because there are getches if you're not talking to somebody. For example, the exemption when you sell residential real estate where you don't pay taxes, that's the rule is 2 out of the last 5 years. If you've lived there 2 out of the last 5 years. So if you bought that house 5 years ago, you live in it for 2.5 years, then you have a job change but you can't sell your house, you can rent that house out. But if you depreciate it, if you just say to your accountant, yeah, I've got this house where I used to live and we're renting it out, and he starts depreciating it, then you're gonna kick yourself out of that exemption part. So you can live in the house and then rent it out for a while, but you can't depreciate it. You just gotta count that as income that has no depreciation to it, and then that's the only way that you can preserve your residential rights to that house when you sell it and still get the exemption. There you go. You're talking potentially tens of thousands in taxes. Yeah, we're going to pick this up. We're going to come back to this. We got to take a quick break. And then we're going to come back to this topic, all right, and all about reverse mortgage and some more about real estate and, of course, estate planning. So join us here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.